Last summer, I went to a music festival, and at this music festival, there was no connectivity whatsoever. For 3 days, we were completely disconnected. No cellular service, no wireless connectivity whatsoever. There was one booth that was selling internet for $20 for 10 minutes. And that experience got me thinking, with a small setup like the one that I'm gonna show in this video, I could have brought this setup to that music festival and probably made enough money selling internet to pay for the entire trip. So I'm gonna show you how you can do the exact same thing using Starlink or some other internet connection, the network that I've got in the box right here, as well as the captive portal setup. And I have documented everything step by step at crosstalksolutions.com in order to make your life easier. All right, let's get into it. Did you know that only about 25% of the people who watch these videos are actually subscribed to Crosstalk Solutions? So if you enjoy this type of content and you'd like to see more, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below. It's absolutely one of the best ways that you can help out the channel, and it is absolutely free. All right, before we get into what's in the box,
what's in the box?
We have to talk about the internet, because that is where everything starts. Now, Starlink is an ideal solution for this type of remote setup. If you're going to a campground or a music festival or just any sort of remote location where a lot of people are congregating and you're gonna wanna supply them with internet, Starlink is basically the perfect way to do it. But you have to keep in mind that Starlink explicitly prohibits the resale of their services in their terms and conditions. So while I'm using Starlink here as part of this network as a proof of concept, I personally am not going to be reselling my own Starlink service. Whether your own moral compass allows you to do it on your own, that's a decision that you can make yourself. If you are going to utilize something like Starlink, this is the old sort of round dish, right? They have a newer rectangular dish. The version that I would recommend is Starlink for RVs, and there's a number of reasons for that. Number one, it's designed to be portable. You can take the Starlink for RVs dish and move it around to different places relatively easily. Second of all, there's no data caps on the Starlink for RVs dish. You're always at the same priority, which means there's never a danger of any sort of overage charges if you go over a data cap. And finally, with the Starlink for RV service, you can pause the service. So it's $135 a month, but you can only turn it on for the months that you're actually going to be using it. Now, beyond Starlink, what other type of internet options are there? In this case, you're gonna have to get a little bit creative. One of the most obvious choices is going to be LTE, right? You can buy a SIM card that has unlimited data. Again, you're gonna wanna check the terms and conditions for reselling that service, or check your own moral compass for reselling that service. But LTE is a viable option if you are near LTE connectivity. In the case of the music festival that I went to last summer, there was zero LTE, so this would not have been a viable option. But if you do something like an LTE modem, such as the Pepwave Max BR1, that's one of our most popular choices, or you can do something like the InstiConnect. The InstiConnect I did a full video on last year. I will put a link to that down in the description. All of these LTE modems have different type of antenna options. So for instance, you can do an omnidirectional antenna that can pick up an LTE signal anywhere around the modem, or you can do something like these binocular antennas that would allow you to pick up an LTE signal from further away, but you do have to actually dial it into the LTE tower you're trying to connect to. Beyond LTE, you could also try to figure something out with a point-to-point antenna. If you can strike a deal with a local neighbor close to where you are going to be setting up your internet connection, maybe you can do line of sight point-to-point from a terrestrial internet connection over to your temporary network in a box setup. That would work just as well. Now, while I'm going to be showing you in this video how to set up a captive portal that will allow you to charge people for internet access, you don't have to charge for internet access. This exact same sort of small portable network in a box setup can be used basically anywhere to give free access to folks that might need it. So if you're staying at a campground, or if you want to pop this up at a tailgate for the big game, or much like the non-profit organization, the ITDRC, UVC sets up when they go respond to disasters, this type of small network can be absolutely invaluable to get people back online in the event of a hurricane or tornado or flooding. Now let's talk about my network in a box, and I am calling this configuration A. I have an alternate configuration that I'm going to be talking about a little bit later in the video, but this is sort of the initial primary configuration that I came up with for this particular project. The original idea when I was planning all of this out is I wanted everything to run off of a single power cord, which I was able to achieve. So we start off with our USW Lite 8 PoE switch. That is my single power cord. You can see the white power brick right there, and it comes over and plugs into this EcoFlow Delta. This entire setup right now is pulling about 25 watts. We're going to talk about power in just a moment. That switch has 4 PoE ports. They're all being used. So one of the PoE ports is coming over here to this 802.3 AF to 24 volt passive PoE adapter that is powering up this Edge Router X, which we're using as our router/firewall. Also coming off of the switch, I have this CloudKey Gen 2 Plus, and I'm using the CloudKey Gen 2 Plus because it has Unify Protect. I'm using one of the other PoE ports off of the switch to power up this G3 Flex camera, because if I was in a situation where I had this internet out somewhere, I would want to make sure that I have a camera keeping an eye on everything in case I had to step away for a moment. I don't want anyone to, steal all my stuff. And the camera acts as a nice deterrent. The final PoE port off of the switch I am using to power up this UAP AC mesh access point. This is going to be plenty powerful, and I really like this form factor for this use case because it can be basically placed anywhere. It's got decent range, and of course it is a fully outdoor rated access point. All right, now let's talk about power. So right now, this whole setup that I have here is using about 25 watts. As soon as I plug in the Starlink, however, that jumps up about another 50 watts. The Starlink is quite a power hog. Now, this EcoFlow Delta 1300 has a lot of battery power, and I was testing it out. I plugged it in, and I was able to power up this entire setup with the Starlink for about 8 total hours. It was actually just under 8 hours. So that's pretty solid, but it's just 1/3 of the day. If you are trying to resell internet at an event, you're probably gonna want 24-hour access, which means that this has to be supplemented somehow to charge it up, or this entire setup needs to be plugged into something else. So what are the options there? Again, you'd have to get creative. These EcoFlow Deltas can be powered up by solar power, but 75 watts running off of this battery and then being supplemented with solar, you're still gonna run out of juice at some point. Unless you have a super huge solar panel array, which again makes this whole setup a lot less portable, that's not really a viable option to keep this thing powered up with the sun. So basically, again, you're gonna have to get creative. You can use a generator, but that's noisy. It's not quite as portable. It's more expensive in terms of the cost of the generator as well as fuel. Or you could try to work something out with, a local organizer. If it's a campground, maybe you can use their power and, give them a little cut of the money or something like that. Again, you'll have to get creative. This is a good 8-hour solution, but beyond that, you're gonna have to come up with something. Taking a more detailed look at the network in a box, here you can see a diagram that I created. All of these diagrams, as well as the equipment list and everything, all the information is out on the blog post at crosstalksolutions.com. If you're interested in that, I will put a link down below in the description. So here we have our internet connection. We have our USW Lite 8 PoE switch. Both of those are plugged into power. We have the EcoFlow Delta 1300 as our battery bank. Coming off of the USW Lite 8 PoE, we have the INS 3AF-I-G 802.3 AF to 24 volt passive PoE converter, which powers up our Edge Router X. We're also using PoE to power up our CloudKey Gen 2 Plus, the UAP ACM access point, as well as the UVC G3 Flex camera. Okay, so let's take a closer look at the actual configuration for all of this equipment. We're gonna start with the Edge Router. So pretty simple setup as far as the Edge Router goes. When you go through the initial setup wizard, the only consideration that you need to make is that the WAN should be on ETH4, because the ETH0 interface is used for PoE in, and you're not getting power over Ethernet from your WAN connection. So you want to make sure that WAN is on ETH4, and then your PoE or the LAN connection is on ETH0. Then I created 2 networks. I have a local network, 192.168.50.x, and a guests network, 192.168.51.x. If we look at the DHCP details for that guests network, this is where my captive portal guests are going to be connecting. We can see that I did a range of 2 to 254, so basically the entire range of that /24 subnet. But look at my DNS here. So for the DNS, I used Cisco's Family Shield DNS IP addresses. This is going to do some level of malware blocking. It's going to block adult sites, and it's just generally safer for the users that are connecting to this connection. Now, one thing that this setup doesn't do is layer 7 or application layer filtering. So while I'm blocking adult content, I'm blocking some malware with Cisco's Family Shield DNS servers, I don't have the ability to block streaming services like Netflix and Hulu. I don't have the ability to block peer-to-peer file sharing like BitTorrent. And that would be a nice thing to have in this setup. So again, we're going to cover that part, that aspect of this in just a moment, but let's keep going with this sort of configuration A setup for now. Keep these IP addresses in mind because we're going to see those again in just a moment. Let's go ahead and hop over to Unify. And in Unify, we can see that I am on the CloudKey Gen 2 Plus. I'm on the latest official release, version 3.0.13, which is Unify Network version 7.3. More specifically, it's 7.3.76. So notice that since I don't have a Unify firewall, I don't get any of the traffic management or firewall and security, none of the intrusion prevention, none of the application layer filtering that you would get with a Unify firewall. But I was able to set up my networks. I did the guest network as a VLAN only network on VLAN ID 51, and then I associated with that this public internet SSID. Let's take a look at that. For the public internet SSID, there are a few considerations for your guest hotspot portal. So number one, for Wi-Fi type, you need to have that set to guest hotspot. For the bandwidth profile, I also created a profile called guests that limits my guests down to 10 megabits by 5 megabits. Again, all of this stuff is configurable. That's what I set as part of my own setup. And I also have client device isolation turned on, which means none of the clients that are connected to the public internet SSID would be able to communicate with each other. They can only communicate out to the internet. Okay, so since we have our guest hotspot configured or selected here in the Wi-Fi settings, we need to go over to Profiles, and then we can modify our guest hotspot profile. So this is where all the magic happens as far as the captive portal and collecting payments from your potential internet customers. We can see that for authentication type, I chose payment. Again, you can do no authentication. You can do a captive portal only that maybe just has terms and conditions. You could create a completely open, wide open network if you want, right? Just for people to connect to if they need internet in like a disaster situation or something like that. For purposes of this video though, we chose payment, and then down here we have our different packages. Our free trial is going to give our guests the ability to connect for free for 10 minutes. It limits them down to that 10 megabits by 5 megabits, and once they've used a free trial, that same device cannot connect again for, I think I set it to like 4 or 5 hours. Then I set up two different paid packages. I have a 24-hour package for $9.95 and a 4-hour package for $5.99. Again, depending on your situation, this may be totally different. You might want to just have a 4-hour package for $9.99 and a 1-hour package for $5.99 or something like that. Again, totally up to you how you're going to run your paid internet plans. But if we take a look at one of these, so the 24-hour plan, we can set our price, we can set the duration that they are authorized. We have the download and upload bandwidth limit. You can set a quota as well if you want them to only be able to hit a certain data cap. And then we have the payment field options that we are enabling and collecting. You have which ones are you enabling and which ones are actually required. This is basically when they're entering in their payment information, they're putting in their first name, last name, address. Do you need to actually require that information, or can it be optional for them to enter it only if they want to? Scrolling down a little bit further, we have our payment gateway stuff. So I'm using Stripe. I already use Stripe for my business, so this was very easy to set up. I am just using Stripe's test API, which allows me to just put in fake credit card numbers and authorize devices without actually being charged for it. But you can also do QuickPay, Authorize.net, PayPal, Merchant Warrior, etc., etc. There's various payment gateway options available. Now, scrolling down, we have our actual captive portal, and I'm using what's called the Unsplash Gallery. So the Unsplash Gallery allows you to type in some keywords and then find a background image that's going to pop up along with your captive portal. So if I wanted to use, for instance, this computer here, I could use this instead. I also went ahead and uploaded my logo. You can do other various changes, such as change the color scheme and whatnot, enable or disable terms of service, and then you can have some welcome text that also displays on that captive portal. Scrolling down under Advanced, this is where we have our Cisco Family Shield DNS servers authorized. So allowed authorization access, I had to put these two external DNS servers into the allowed authorization access section so that when our users connect, they can hit those DNS servers and resolve DNS before they're actually authorized in the captive portal. That seems to work perfectly fine, and I logged in, I did a little bit of, research, and I found that it was in fact blocking adult sites, no problem. Now, once all of that is entered, you can simply click Apply Changes, or sometimes you can't click Apply Changes. So this is one of the things that I absolutely cannot stand. I've always had an issue with Unify's guest hotspot portal in that there are always tend to be problems with it, right? So case in point, I made some changes, right? I changed the Unsplash gallery background image. I cannot hit apply changes. Now, I have tested this on multiple current Unify versions, and it does not work. Sometimes it works fine, sometimes it doesn't. As you can see right now, I'm hitting apply and nothing is happening. So any changes that I made right now would have to be totally wiped out. I'm gonna have to leave and go make those changes in the legacy portal instead. So let's go ahead and switch over to that. We're gonna click System. Yes, we're gonna leave our changes. We're gonna click Advanced, and we're gonna switch to the legacy interface. Once we're in the legacy interface, we can click Settings, and then Guest Control, where we have Hotspot, and then here's most of those same settings, not all of those same settings. So for instance, the Unsplash gallery images that allow you to pick a stock photo to put as the background of your captive portal, you can't do that in the legacy interface, all right? So it just doesn't work. So again, kind of annoying that you can go through here and change stuff. Like if I edit my free trial, we can see my lockout is 5 hours. The duration is 10 minutes. I've got the limit. So I can create all of these changes here in the legacy portal, except for some of the design changes that are part of the new interface. They're just not available, and you can't save those changes in Unify. This, by the way, has been a problem since about version 6 of Unify. We're now on version 7.3. To Unify's credit, I kind of bitched about this on Twitter a little bit today, and they did write me, or they wrote back and said, hey, this is going to be improved in version 7.4 coming soon. So 7.4 isn't even early access yet, so who knows when that's going to happen, and what does improved mean? I mean, is it going to be fixed in 7.4, or is it just going to be improved? Time will tell. We just don't know. Our captive portal is set up. Let's go ahead and connect to it now. So going to Settings, we are going to find my public internet Wi-Fi network. Connecting to the network should pop the captive portal in just a few seconds. There we go, and as you can see, the Unsplash background did not work. Now again, I don't know what's going on with Unify's implementation of all of this stuff. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. When I first set this up, it was working fine. Now it is not, and I haven't tried to really mess around with it too much. So we're gonna accept the terms and conditions. Let's go ahead and do our 24-hour package for $9.95, and we're gonna pay by credit card. Stripe, of course, lets me put in fake credit card numbers. And then we're going to put in our country and an email address and say connect. Okay, success. So we are now connected. Let's run a speed test. Now this is not through Starlink, this is through my normal Comcast business account, but it should be locked down to 10 megabits down and 5 megabits up, which it appears that it is. Back in Unify, if I come over here to Settings and then click on Profiles and the Guest Hotspot, we can open our Hotspot Manager, which is going to show me all of the various people that are connected. So under Guests, we can see that I have authorized 24 hours and it is valid until tomorrow at 12:59 p.m. If we click on Payments and Transactions here, we can also see the different people that have paid. So this setup is pretty nice, and it's going to work just fine, especially as a temporary, portable setup that we're just bringing out to a festival or a campground or something like that. But it still bugs me a little bit that there's no way to do application layer filtering. I don't necessarily want people connecting to my internet and using it for Netflix or Disney Plus. I don't want people connecting to my internet and using it for, torrenting. If someone gets caught torrenting through my internet connection, especially if it's like a LTE SIM card or something like that, I'm going to get the nasty letters about the pirated software or movies, and they're potentially putting my internet connection at risk by doing that. So I want to be able to block that sort of stuff if possible. So then what can we possibly do? Well, there are other firewall options such as pfSense that are going to allow you to have plugins that will do that sort of application layer filtering, but those firewalls are more expensive and they're going to take up a little bit more power. They're not PoE powered. You're going to need an extra power plug and stuff like that. But what about the UDR? Okay, the UDR actually is a pretty interesting solution for this problem. The UDR is almost completely self-contained. Let's take a look at the diagram here. So if we have the UDR, we've got our WAN connection plugged into it. It has an access point right on top. It also has the Unify controller built in. In addition, it has a switch on the back and 2 Power over Ethernet ports. So with those 2 Power over Ethernet ports, we can use one for a camera. This does have Protect on board, albeit it doesn't have a lot of storage space for Protect, but if you're just running one camera and doing, event recording only, you should be okay for a, temporary event. And you also have the ability to put in an optional second access point. So let's say you had the UAP AC mesh running off of the PoE port of the UDR with a 100-foot cable, right? You could string it far away and extend the wireless coverage of this network. You've got your Wi-Fi 6 access point on top of the UDR, and then you've got another access point, 100 feet away that's providing more coverage to a completely separate area. In addition, you would then have your Unify firewall, which is going to give you all of those application layer settings. All right, let me get this thing plugged in and I'll actually show you that in Unify. One other thing that I like about this UDR setup is that the power consumption is much lower. The power consumption on the UDR is only about 8 watts versus the 25 watts of the network in a box. So without the optional camera and without the optional UAP AC mesh access point, you're going to be pulling a lot less wattage, which should make the battery last longer. One of the things that I don't like about this UDR setup is that the hardware itself is a little bit suspect, right? There's been a lot of people in the forums online who have complained about the hardware locking up, and so if you're looking for something that's portable and robust, the UDR might not be the most robust solution out there, especially if it's getting jostled around in a box or the back of a van as you're traveling from place to place to set it up. And of course, you always have the problem of the UDR never being in stock. It's a great device if you can get your hands on one, and I would recommend if you're going to do something like this with it, you're going to want 2 of them, right, just for that redundancy. Of course, you can always find out when it does come in stock by checking out uinotified.net for all of your product in-stock notification needs. The UDR is almost the exact same configuration as the network in a box setup. However, if we come over here to settings, we have the traffic management feature enabled since it's a Unify firewall. Under traffic management, I've set up a rule where we are blocking peer-to-peer, file transfers, and media streaming on the guest's network. So that should take care of any of the unwanted application layer traffic, and there's other options or other rules that we might want to set up as well. The only other thing that I did differently, if we come over here to networks and click on guests, instead of using Cisco's Family Shield DNS servers, I'm instead using Unify's built-in content filtering, and I have it set to family, which blocks VPNs, explicit, pornographic, and malicious domains. The only thing here is we don't know exactly how Ubiquiti maintains their content filtering, right? There's really not a lot of information about that. So, it's something that I would recommend testing out. Test it versus like Cisco's Family Shield and see which one works better. Now let's take a look at some completely hypothetical financial numbers for this type of setup. Again, this is totally made up, all right? But the way that I look at it is this. If there is a festival with, say, 10,000 people, and we can get just 1% of people per day to sign up for our 4-hour plan, and 0.5% of people per day to sign up for our 24-hour plan, That means we're going to have 50 people in the 24-hour plan, 100 people in the 4-hour plan, and our total revenue across the 3 days, given those numbers, would be about just under $3,300. Could end up being more, could end up being less, but I don't think these numbers are completely unrealistic. If you have 10,000 people at a 3-day event with zero internet access, 1% per day signing up for your service seems feasible to me. So there you have it, my Starlink side hustle, aka network in a box setup. How would you guys do this differently? Do you like the configurations that I came up with? Would you do something different? Maybe there's other equipment like MikroTik or something out there that's going to do a better job than the Unify Ubiquity stuff that I picked out for my setup. Please put that in the comments below. Let's go ahead and open source or crowdsource the setup of this network in a box and come up with the absolute best configuration. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 more videos for you to watch next. The top video here is my time spent with the ITDRC setting up very similar small networks for people in need, and the bottom video is my video on that InstiConnect LTE router with those directional binoculars antenna. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you in the next video.